Thank you very much. I feel very honoured to be invited to this meeting and met up with some people that haven't met up with before, which is fantastic. And I was given this, some of you may know, it's been mentioned that I managed to get deleted from Wikipedia last week. And they made this t-shirt for me. I feel honoured. I say about being on Wikipedia, I didn't know I was actually on it until I was told I was going to be taken off it. So, so I haven't been crushed yet. But everyone seems to think it's a great honour because it means that I'm now considered dangerous enough to be removed for public consumption. So what I'm going to talk today about is doctoring data. My son claims he came up with the title because I said I'm writing this book about how data are all manipulated. And we had a little family brainstorm, and he said, call it doctoring data. So everybody else thinks I called it doctoring data because it's a really good title. It's not mine. What I'm hoping to talk to you about here, just starting actually though, as John Locke is a British philosopher. He said, no man can be forced to be healthful, whether he will or not, in a free society. Individuals must judge for themselves what information they choose to heed and what they ignore. And I think that's very true, and I'm always very concerned that people must make their own minds up. That's the only way you're going to get change. You can't force things onto people. So a bit about me. Graduated from Aberdeen University in Scotland many years ago. Many years ago. Many years ago. Even more than that, I think now. I work as a GP. I'm not a cardiologist, although I am probably considered to know a bit about cardiology in England. I wrote the great Cholesterol Con, which was my first attempt to say to people, cholesterol does not cause heart disease, you mad fools. Of course, everyone has now agreed with me, and the whole world now doesn't take any statins, and in fact, believe everything I have to say. I wrote then Doctoring Data, which is, there's some copies around outside, which is really some of which I'm talking about today. I run a blog, drmalcolmkendrick.org. And a new book, Statin Nation. I did bring a few copies here. I was going to bring quite a lot of copies, but somebody locked my garage before I came out, so I couldn't get any copies out. And I recently moved from Wikipedia. It's a fantastic thing, it's the most famous thing about me now, so I'm not sure that's a good thing or not. Because of my ideas, plenty of people think I'm a bit like this, the Mad Hatter. Hatters went mad because they used lead to make felt. And when you take in too much lead, you go mad. So there really were Mad Hatters. That's where the idea from Alice's Wonderland comes from. I've not yet been referred to the General Medical Council. You don't know what that is, but they're the people that say you can't be a doctor any longer because you're saying such ridiculous things. A number of people find that a bit surprising. And say, how on earth can you keep practicing? Because you're saying all these things. Don't you get reported? Well, actually, no. You don't get reported unless you give advice to people online on the internet, something I have ruthlessly never done. So when people say, my mother's 92 or whatever and she's on statins, what do you advise? I say, advise you don't ask me. Why did I write this book? To show how data from clinical studies are distorted, to allow people to make informed decisions about the intervention and drugs they receive, and to highlight some of the really bad advice we're given. I'm not going to go through all that today, but a lot of people, I not only think that statins are terrible, cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease, I also think we should go out into the sun a lot more and get lots of sun exposure, because it's incredibly healthy and good for you. And studies in Scandinavia has shown that if you avoid the sun, it is as bad for you in total health effects as smoking. Takes approximately 6 years of your life expectancy. Oops, sorry, I'll go back again. Also, the bad advice, avoid saturated fat. I've been going about this for 35 years. You lot are all newcomers to this world. Some of you weren't even born when I was saying saturated fat is healthy. The ridiculous advice of eating more carbohydrates. I mean, who came up with this one? Oh, I tell you what, people can't control their blood sugar levels if they've got diabetes, for example. Let's get them to eat sugar. Yeah, sorry, could you tell me that again? Because right now I'm having trouble understanding it. Eat more sugar. Okay. Subject yourself to cancer screening. This is perhaps more controversial. I'm a great non-believer in cancer screening. And stop believing experts know what they're doing or saying. And I want to reduce the fear and anxiety. People are terrified of their cholesterol level. People are terrified of their PSA level. People are terrified of their whatever it is they're currently measuring level. And people are very anxious about their health. You know, your health, your body looks after itself most of the time. You will be fit and healthy. You don't need to worry about all this stuff. You're just being drawn into an over-medicalized world. So now we're in fake news. That's just because I'm in America. I thought I'd say fake news. I've no idea who said that. Who said that? Well, you know, fake news has been around a lot longer than Donald. The Donald who came from Scotland. Can you imagine? Well, his mother did. But if two people present a diverging view on a subject, who should one trust? This is a very difficult issue. I don't know the answer to it. I don't think anyone does. How do you know that someone's telling you stuff that is true, correct, whatever word you want to use? How can you tell? There's so much evidence out there. I was going to write a paper on cholesterol where I was going to reference with 50 references saying high cholesterol is bad for you, and I was going to write another paper reference with 50 other papers saying cholesterol is good for you or bad for you, whichever is the other way around. And I could have written two completely different papers using two completely lots of different evidence, fully referenced, and I could have made the point in either direction I wanted to. You can find evidence to support any view you want out there. There is nothing you can't find evidence for. But clearly some of it's rubbish. How do you know which is rubbish? Well, I've tried to help people to understand this. We've had some of these quotes, so I'm just going to whiz through them. Marcia Angel. Did you get you got the Richard Horton one as well, did you? The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps a half, may be simply untrue. Science has taken a turn towards darkness. This is a really difficult issue. I don't know how we get out of this place. I think I've decided a nuclear bomb is the only answer. Because it's just a huge... I look at research and I say, that's rubbish, that's rubbish, that's rubbish. And my daughter, who's doing medicine, says, well, how do you know that's rubbish? I said, look at the author. There's certain authors, I look at a paper. In fact, there's certain things that people say in papers. One of them is the word paradox. If I see the word paradox in a paper, that's it. I'm not reading it. If I see the word, an explanation of, this is someone trying to explain why the current dogma is correct and this research that's disproved it is wrong. So if you see a paper that says an explanation for the paradox, then you might as well just set fire to that paper immediately. Richard Smith, this is the BMJ. He's done a lot of work on telling you how useless journals are and how rubbish the evidence is. The poor quality of medical research is widely acknowledged, yet disturbingly, the leaders of the medical profession seem only minimally concerned about the problems and make no apparent effort to find a solution. This is true. Everybody in this world knows the research is rubbish. It's dreadful. It's just, I mean, at what point would you say that the amount of research that is wrong, clearly wrong, and manipulated in turn to bias would destroy your ability to sort of trust any paper? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? If you pick up something and say, I don't know whether to believe this or not, this is a terrible situation to be in. This is a situation which we find ourselves. But why are data doctored? It's not all money. I know that Jason's talked about money, 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 and I agree. Money is a big driver for a lot of the research data to be published, to be distorted. But people also get attached to ideas. And no one ever puts in a conflict of interest. I really believe that saturated fat causes heart disease, and I've believed this for 20 years, and my entire career is based on it. They don't do this because the only conflicts that people seem to think are important are monetary. But there are far more important conflicts of interest than this. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is driving a great deal of the vegan doctrine and dogma. But you'll never see anyone saying, I am a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We don't expect people to disclose that evidence, do we? Yeah, I think that's far more important. If somebody said to me, I'm a, whatever they have in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or I'm a vegan, then you could say, well, I know where you're coming from, but they don't tell you these things. Because people also, they defend their ideas and opinions with such ferocity. This is another thing. People, once they get an idea and they like an idea, it's incredibly difficult to shift it. Why do people insist on defending their ideas and opinions with such ferocity, as if defending honor itself? What could be easier to change than an idea? Ideas are the most difficult things to change that there are. And they're immortal as well, because you can kill the person holding an idea. The idea can carry on and on and on. And they're emotionally attached to us as well. Facts have very little effect on what people believe, I have found. I can give you 100 facts, 1,000,000 facts. I can, you know, somebody says, I say to you, what fact would change your mind? And they tell me, and I give them the fact. It makes no difference. There's a famous story of a psychiatrist whose patient thinks they're dead. The patient thinks they're dead, and the psychiatrist tried for years to get them to change their idea. He says, well, you're not dead. You're clearly not dead. You're walking around and stuff. No, I'm dead. So he said, the psychiatrist has this fantastic idea. He said, what I'll do is I'm going to prick your finger with a needle. I says, because he asked, do dead people bleed? And the patient says, no, dead people don't bleed. So the psychiatrist gets a needle, pricks his finger, and he bleeds. And the patient looks down and goes, well, I guess dead people do bleed. And, you know, it's like this whole idea. We all look at the data. We all look at the fat and the high carb and all this, and we think, well, look at the data. Look at the science. You know, look at what happens in the body. I mean, come on. And they just go, no, well, it's clear that it's still clear that we're right and you're wrong. And you realize that you're bouncing off something here that is incredibly difficult to change. Anyone seen the film? This is now my favorite film ever, Inception. Have you seen it? Little spinny thing. Is it going to fall over or not? Who thinks yes, it's going to fall over? Who thinks no, it's not going to fall over? The most resilient parasite is an idea. It's true. It is the most resilient parasite. You can't get it out of people's heads. I used to have a picture of a plane flying into one of the Twin Towers saying, that was an idea that did that. It was an idea that did that. Someone is willing to sit in a plane and fly it into a building at 500 miles an hour and kill themselves, everyone else on board, because of an idea. Try shifting that one. Why date a doctor? Because people like to be together. They like to think in the same groups. We're all sort of thinking here in the same group. And it would be very difficult for us to think otherwise. And if I was to stand up here and say, I think you're all wrong, I think carbohydrates are wonderful, you'll be going, boo. But of course, we're a minority, aren't we? But the conformity hazard. Why date a doctor? This contains possibly new information which may stimulate independent thought. People don't like to stand out, they like to fit in. Being part of a group is hugely important. And for doctors, it's enormously important. Well, I know this because they don't like me very much sometimes. I like this. This is also this confirmation bias. I like this because it was done about Donald Trump, and it was in the Washington Post, and it was October the 24th. And basically, a group of people had decided Donald Trump can't possibly win this election. It is impossible for him to win this election, and then he won the election. But I mean, where I live in the UK, we've voted Brexit to leave the European Union, and everyone that voted to remain is in this circle, and we all speak to each other about how stupid all the people that voted Brexit were. And all the people who voted Brexit say how whinging, moaning, lefty, elitist bastards we all are. And we all confirm and conform what we're believing, all right? This is how we do things. This is an example of groupthink. I watched the program about the Challenger, and there was a guy involved in designing the O-ring for one of the solid fuel boosters who said, if you take this thing off when it's 0 degrees, the O-ring will not expand, well, it will not have contracted properly. 42 seconds into takeoff, the Challenger will blow up. 42 seconds after takeoff, the Challenger blew up. Now, a lot of people spent a lot of time going, oh, how did that happen? We've no idea how that happened. And eventually this guy stood up and said, well, I'm going to tell you how it happened. It took great courage to do that. But in those meetings, it was basically, we're going off, we're going to launch, we're not going to stop this launch. And it became this thing. And everyone was like, yeah, we're going to launch, we're going to launch, we're going to launch. Who would stand up and say no? So there's huge pressures on people to conform. Why date a doctor? Another reason is people become more and more extreme. You know, Cass Sunstein advised Obama on how to win the election. Nudge. And his thing is, if you want to become an extremist, hang around with people you agree with. So all the people who do the guidelines, all the people on the other side, they become more and more extreme. It's like with cholesterol. When I was at medical school, the high cholesterol was 7.5. Then it was 6, then it was 5.5. I've just read a paper where we now have a 0 hypothesis. The only healthy level of LDL is 0. 0. This I'm not making that up. How do you get to that point of mind-boggling stupidity? Because everyone around you goes, yeah, well, the lower the better, we'll keep going. Well, can you get lower than 0? Well, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? We could get to -4. So here I am, I'm going to suggest -4 is the correct healthy level of cholesterol. Because people just go mad in groups, they just become this thing. And why data doctored? Well, we have key opinion leaders, and I would say this is me discussing cholesterol with a key opinion leader. I'm the little guy on the left, and the key opinion leader is the one on the right. They get very angry, they get very upset, they won't change their mind. Their status is dependent on it. Can you imagine, you've been an opinion leader in lipid research or whatever it is, for the last 30 years, and you get taken to conferences, and you get given awards and gongs and money and everything. And then someone's asking you to say, you know what, you're wrong. And they're going to go, I think you might be right. I think I am wrong. In fact, I have been wrong about everything for the last 30 years. God, I've really been stupid, haven't I? You're right. You've convinced me I'm going to change my mind. And how many times has that happened, one might ask? And the answer, in my experience, is it never happens. As Max Planck said, Max Planck, who was the man who actually decided to publish Einstein's first papers on special relativity, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that's familiar with it. Now, all scientists who lived in the 19th century all looked like this. They normally had big beards, and they looked real fun guys, didn't they? I always think, that might be Max Planck, it might be someone else, I'm just making it up probably now. And this is Sackett, talking about the power of experts. Experts become too powerful. He founded evidence-based medicine. He was from McMaster University. I met him a few times, a fantastic guy. I was working with him at one point and then realized that evidence-based medicine was going to be taken over by the pharmaceutical industry, and we were all doomed. And when you're Scottish, you always think we're doomed. So that's our default. You're all doomed. And as he said, he would never again lecture, write, or referee anything to do with evidence-based clinical practice, because he said, I have become too influential. No one will challenge me. All right? So if I say, do this, everyone did that. So he retired himself. Unfortunately, because of doing that meant he was the one person that should never have retired himself. Whereas all the others who think I should carry on forever, he said, an opinion leader should be given 3 years and then retired. So it'd be like a president or something. You're off. You can no longer get in the way. He's not doing this because he ceased to believe in evidence-based practice, but because he's worried about the power of experts and stifling new ideas. He wants the retirement of experts to be made compulsory. Any luck with that? Well, the only people who would ever vote on that would be the experts themselves, so I can't see that one going very well. Why are data doctored? Here's another one, money. We've talked about it a bit. I'll just give you one example because it always makes me laugh. Is Dr. Robert Califf was Obama's nominee for the head rather than the heart. I mean, it might be the heart of the FDA. The Republican who chairs the committee said Califf had been through an exhaustive vetting process to make sure he had no conflicts of interest. No conflicts of interest. All right. And my staff tell me they haven't found anything that would call into doubt. Sorry, I'm laughing because I know what comes next. A joke shared is a joke something. Anyway, who knows? And there he is. He looks like the kind of guy who statins wouldn't melt in his mouth or whatever. So here was his conflict of interest statement. Merck, Roche, I've never heard of Aterovax, Bayer, Janssen, Eli, Lilly and Company, Shearing Plough, Novartis, Amylin, Seos, Bristol Myers Squibb, blah, 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 blah. This is a man who, according to the vetting committee, has no conflicts of interest. Well, this is his conflicts of interest statement. Do you know how long it took me to find that? 30 seconds. So what was their exhaustive vetting thing? I mean, what were they doing? Going, do you think he has conflicts of interest? No. Do you? No. Do you? No. None of us here think he has conflicts of interest. Would any of you like to go and find out if he has a conflict of interest? No. Yeah. So, no, well, I wouldn't call these conflicts of interest, ladies and gentlemen. This is a perfectly acceptable, whatever it might be acceptable for. So my staff, I mean, this is like, we haven't found anything that would call into doubt your ability to lead the FDA fairly and impartially. I mean, so, I'm sorry. Rosebud. I'm losing the will to live. I mean, it's just so extraordinarily sort of ridiculous. You just give up, don't you? Well, he's still smiling. That's the smile you make when someone inserts $50,000 up your backside. So what happens when data are doctored? This is John Ioannidis, who keeps saying really, really heavy-duty things about data. It never quite gets stroppy enough, in my opinion. Because he says, this is his thing, lies, damn lies in medical science. Moreover, for many current scientific fields, claimed research findings may often simply be accurate measures of the prevailing bias. It is more likely for a research claim to be false than true. This paper is 2005, the most read paper in the history of medical research. So there's a lot of doctors out there who believe this is true, but everyone's keeping rather quiet. So this is why most published research findings are false, and it's true. Well, maybe that's false for me to say it's true. Maybe I've resulted in a paradox here. Hold on. Can I ever get out of it? I don't know. So things are not what they seem. Now, I thought I'd show you this. Things are not what you seem, because every morning I lie in bed, and I've got two wardrobes, and one's a bit longer than the other one. They're both the same height, but you know what? I look at them and I think that one's definitely higher than that one. I can't see it as being the same height. Here's two tables. One of them is long and thin, and one of them is short and fat. Correct. You've seen this before. Let's take you through it. This is how they start. This is what you do. You change them in twist one through 90 degrees. Then you shade one in a bit. Then you shade it in a bit more and put legs on it. And my goodness, it's changing shape in front of your very eyes. You can't trust your own eyes. There we are, back again to the start. Things are not what they seem. And we see things. Here's a little question for you. This is my terrible drawing. Fast thinking, slow thinking. Things are not what we seem. We see things. We have to think about them differently. There's a baseball bat and a baseball, very badly drawn. Between the two of them, they cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. Quickly, what does each one cost? How much does the bat cost? How much does the ball cost? And you're thinking, I know a lot of you are thinking, this is a trick question because I'm not asking it otherwise. No, it is not $1.10. Because I've just told you that the bat costs $1 more than the ball. So that can't be the answer. So what's the answer? $1.05 and 5 cents. That's from Daniel Kahneman, Fast Thinking, Slow Thinking. We jump to conclusions very quickly about what we see. And then we're stuck with those ideas. And this is partly what I'm talking about. But in a moment, I'm going to ask you to stand by. I would do sound effects. Beep. That's good, thank you. Because you are about to enter. Not the twilight zone. The outer limits. You can do the sound effect now. Woo! And now for a bit of high-powered graphics. Way. And as William Shatner would attest, this is all going to be rather shocking. And that is acting, isn't it? That's really good acting. Is he frightened? Is he scared? Things are not what they seem. Right, here's a guy, he's a sumo wrestler. The one in front of him is thinking, what the? This doesn't mean he's a chicken, nor are these little aerials that make sure that his anal sphincter doesn't release. Okay. I'm going to ask you a quick question. You don't have to stick your hand in there if you don't want to, okay? How many people think obesity causes type 2 diabetes? How many people think obesity causes type 2 diabetes? So, if you do, that guy has got type 2 diabetes. His body mass index is, I don't know what it is, I've never asked him, I'm too frightened. It's probably about 60. I wouldn't fancy fighting him. Here's another picture. He's a young man. Look at him. Body mass index, 16, 15, perfect. It's what we're all aiming for in life, isn't it? He's super fit. I don't know what he does. I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to ask you a question. Which one of these ones do you think has type 2 diabetes? And you know you're going to be told something slightly strange. The one on the left will definitely not have type 2 diabetes because he's a sumo wrestler, and no sumo wrestlers have type 2 diabetes, no matter how fat they get. The one on the right will have type 2 diabetes very severely, will probably have non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, will have triglycerides through the roof, and will die quite young because he is metabolically up shit creek without a paddle. How do I know this? Because he has this condition that most of you will never have heard of. Some of you may. It's burden non-ACEP lipodystrophy, otherwise known as generalized. It's congenital generalized lipodystrophy. He has no fat cells. He has no fat cells at all in his body. And because of that, he will definitely have type 2 diabetes. He must have type 2 diabetes. And this is what happens to people with this condition. They have hepatomegaly, they have hyperinsulinemia, they have acanthosis nigricans followed by onset of diabetes, they have extreme hypertriglyceridemia, they have insulin-resistant diabetes, pancreatitis, hepatic steatosis, cirrhosis, and liver failure. So you have absolutely no fat cells in your body, and you definitely will have type 2 diabetes. You can't avoid it. Why does this happen? There's a very simple answer to it, obviously. You can't store any energy. So where are you going to put it? So after you've eaten a meal, and your liver's full of fat, and your liver's full of glycogen, and your muscles are full of glycogen, it's going into the bloodstream. As triglycerides, the insulin's going through the roof. It's trying to store your food. It's trying to store this energy, and it can't. Type 2 diabetes is caused by not being able to store energy. And so you'll get people who are like 100 stone who are not diabetic, because by God, they can store energy. You'll get thin people who are diabetic, because they have reached the limit of their energy storage systems. And that is why you get type 2 diabetes. So there you are. Things are not what they seem. But now I'm going to talk to you more about the doctoring data. I was just trying to switch your brains around there a bit to thinking about different things. Relative risk versus absolute risk. This is one of the ways that the industry uses to manipulate data. So we have Lipitor, which was advertised as reducing the risk of heart attack by 36%. Absolutely fantastic. What idiot wouldn't prescribe statins given that? Well, I'm one, obviously. Relative versus absolute risk. 2 screening tools for prostate cancer. Screening tool A reduces the risk of dying of prostate cancer by 20 to 30%. Screening tool B saves 1 life for every 10,000 person years of screening. Which one would you choose? We'll get into that later. A or B. Relative risk versus absolute risk. Something all doctors should know, something everybody should know, but most people don't. And whenever I've asked a doctor whether they know the difference, I've never got any single one of them to tell me the answer. Obviously, everyone here knows, but I'm just going to refresh your memories about the thing you already know. Treat 100 people with a blood pressure lowering agent for 1 year versus placebo. End of the study, 1 person dies in the treatment arm, 2 die in the placebo arm. 99% are still alive in the treatment arm, 98% are still alive in the placebo arm. The absolute risk reduction is 1% to 99 versus 98% of people. The relative risk reduction is 50%, 1 versus 2. Okay, next. Treat 1,000 people. Same thing. At the end of the study, 1 person dies in the treatment arm, 2 die in the placebo arm. 99.9% of people are still alive in the treatment arm, 99.8% of people in the placebo arm. Absolute risk reduction, 0.1%, 99.9% versus 99.8%. Relative risk reduction, 50%, 1 versus 2. That's how they do it. Okay? Relative risk may or may not mean anything. In fact, it means nothing. It means nothing unless you know what the absolute risk was. They don't tell you this. They don't give you those figures. So have a wild guess as to whether or not the 36% was a relative or an absolute risk reduction. Well, you know the answer to that clearly because I've told you it inadvertently. So what did it mean in this study? Was 36% a relative and absolute risk? What was the absolute risk reduction? After a 5-year trial, 98.1 of those taking atorvastatin did not have a heart attack versus 97% who did not have a heart attack in the placebo arm. Is everyone following this? I'm losing myself on it. I do this so often. I've made a horrible mistake in one of the slides. I didn't notice it. I've given this lecture, that particular slide about 10 times, and no one's ever said that's wrong. So obviously no one's paying any attention. Pay attention. There's a deliberate mistake coming up. So 1.9% of those taking atorvastatin did have a heart attack. 3% of those taking placebo did have a heart attack. The absolute difference was 1.1%. The relative difference was 1.9 versus 3% is 36%. Okay? So that's how they present the data to everybody. They present it in a way that sounds fantastic. So what was the difference in fatal heart attack? Because you'll notice they said heart attack. There's another thing they do. They say things, it's like a magic trick. You think, how did they do that? How did they do that? What was the difference in overall mortality? The risk of dying of anything, which is the thing you really take a tablet for, isn't it? Oh, it's okay, I didn't die of a heart attack, but you died 10 years earlier because you died of liver failure. As I say, I can prevent everybody in this room from dying from a heart attack. I can guarantee that. I'm going to push you all off the edge of a cliff. Right. Well, you might have a heart attack on the way down, I suppose. Not many would be dead, though, of a heart attack before they hit the ground. Have to make it a quite short cliff. El Capitan's too high. Well, what was the difference in absolute and cardiovascular mortality in that same trial that is presented as being wonderful? There's the answer. It was 0. There were no lives saved. There was no one who's presented from having a fatal cardiovascular or having a heart attack or cardiovascular death. So there you are, 36% turns into 0. It's amazing, isn't it? So now you've got one tool for understanding the bullshit they come out with, okay? And people say to me, oh, statins save millions of lives, aren't they wonderful? I go, no. Jupiter. This was a really mega influential trial. It was in primary prevention, i.e. people who hadn't had a heart attack or a stroke, whereas a lot of others had shown some benefits of this size in secondary prevention. This changed practice around the world, possibly resulted in the greatest number of new prescriptions for anything in the history of the world. Stephen Nissen, who's been mentioned before, in my opinion, you could stick a corkscrew in him and straighten it out, but other people quite like him. Anyway, before I get hand up for it. Compared to those who received placebo, patients receiving the drug rosuvastatin had 48% reduction in stroke, 46% reduction in the need for interventions to reopen blocked blood vessels, and a 20% drop in all-cause mortality. There you are, all-cause mortality. Da, 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 da. I agree. The extent of reduction in deaths, heart attacks, and strokes is larger than we've ever seen in any trial I can remember. I've lost count of the number of times I've heard Stephen Nissen say that about a trial, by the way. So, I was advised not to do this, but I'm going to do this because I have a little song about Jupiter. It goes like this. Because justification for the use of a statin in prevention and interventional trial evaluating rosuvastatin. Now that is a real anagram, isn't it? So it goes like this. J, a joke, a great big joke. But you are going to take this drug. P, a lot, it causes diabetes. I do not think that it works. T, it up and count the money. Enormous profits to be made. That was a difficult one to get right. R, it stands for rosuvastatin, which takes us back to J. Thank you very much. Okay. So let's have a look at it in a little more detail. There were 8,901 in the placebo arm at the start of the trial, 8,901 in the statin arm, so it was completely matched. They probably all had the same hair color and everything. The number of those dying in each arm was 235 versus 190. I'll get to that in a minute, which is 2.64% versus 2.14%. Is an absolute difference of 0.5%. And this could be represented as a number needed to treat to get a benefit of 200 over 2 years of treatment, or an NNT of 400 for 1 year. So you had to treat 400 people to get any form of benefit. You can try that with antibiotics and see how far you get. Oh, I treated 400 people and one of them got better. Well, that's just fantastic. That drug is just the best drug I'll ever come across. What happened to the 399? Well, they all died. So, I knew they'd done something with this trial because it was so weird. It was beyond weird. And I didn't do this analysis because I couldn't work it out. It took Michel Delaugereau, who did the original Lyon study, Mediterranean diet in France, Professor Delaugereau, bright guy, scary. So what he found was in the placebo arm, and this is interesting in of itself, In the placebo arm, there were 68 myocardial infarctions resulting in 6 deaths. In a Jupiter statin arm, there were 31 myocardial infarctions resulting in 9 deaths. So there's a lot more myocardial infarctions, but apparently statins can stop you dying of MIs or something. Oh, no, they don't. They increase your risk of dying if you have an MI. Stroke, difference between stroke, placebo, 64 strokes resulting in 6 deaths, statin, 33 strokes resulting in 3 deaths. So if you look at stroke plus MI, and these are deaths, in the placebo, 12 deaths from stroke and MI, in the statin, 12 deaths from stroke and MI. That was the Jupiter study. Those are the figures. So what did people not die of in the Jupiter study on the statin? They didn't die of cancer. A finding not found in any other study ever before or since. So you'd have to say, interesting. If you look at the actual graph of the deaths, yes, there are 2 lines here. It's like so extraordinary. It's like overwhelming, isn't it? And you see they had to expand it by 10 or 100 times or whatever it is, the placebo versus rosuvastatin arm. And you can just see, just as we reached, the lines were beginning to come back together again, weren't they? Then they stopped the trial because it was so beneficial. And then just at that point, the placebo arm ticked up and the rosuvastatin arm went flat. You mean after you'd broken the trial, you managed to make the graphs go in different directions? Right. You know, if this wasn't being recorded, I'd say what I really felt, but I might get sued by someone for saying, I think this data is a bit suspect. Call me old-fashioned, if you will. Anyway, back to Stephen Nissen. Compared to the extent of reduction in deaths, heart attacks, and strokes is larger than we've seen in any trial I can remember. Well, the reduction in cardiovascular deaths was nothing at all. And yet this is presented as a wonder trial. Just amazing. I mean, but the problem is, to explain that, this is Michel Delaugereau said, it's quite unusual that the burden of calculating cardiovascular mortality is placed on the readers. All methods used lead to the same conclusion. There's no significant difference in cardiovascular mortality between the 2 groups. He sat and worked that out. I actually, once he pointed it out to me, I could see what they'd done, but it's so cleverly done sometimes, you can't work it out. Or it takes you days, weeks. I've had papers where I've had to look at it for 2 weeks and think, what have they done? And eventually you find out. Relative versus absolute risk, I'm going back to cardiovascular screening. This is because I think sometimes doctors are not that clever, and that's Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So screening tool A reduces the risk of dying of prostate cancer by 20 to 30%. Screening tool B saves 1 life for every 10,000 person years of screening. Which one would you choose? Well, obviously the answer is these are both the same study. And these figures are both the same figures, just presented in a different way. Because when I say about doctors, they ask, do physicians understand cancer screening statistics? Well, doctors, this is a study. Doctors were told that prostate cancer screening improved 5-year survival from 68 to 99%, a 31% improvement. Now, that sounds fantastic. Half the doctors responded that if 1,000 men were screened, this would result in 300 to 310 lives saved. Okay, guys, I think we're not understanding mathematics here, are we? The actual reduction in cancer mortality was 0.4 per 1,000 patients over 5 years. These are the same figures. Now, I've mixed up a couple of studies because no one ever comes up with the same figures as studies. It's impossible to sometimes calculate what they're doing. So I looked at the UK. In the UK, about 1 in 1,000 men develop prostate cancer every year. The incidence rate is actually 0.99 rather than 1 in 1,000. So, and this is where my mistake happened. If you picked up everyone, you'd pick up 1 in 1,000 or 0.099%. If they survive, this is where I made a mistake. So if they all survive, the mortality rate will be 0, won't it? But 0.99% of them will still be alive, okay? And of course, the other problem with cancer screening is the big issue of 5-year survival, because if you've survived for 5 years, that's considered to be a cure. So if you pick something up earlier, this is the traveling on the train from town A to town B to town C. You get on the train in A and you arrive at C. That would be when your prostate cancer starts, that's when you die. Well, if you screen early, you might have that amount of the journey to go. If it's picked up through symptoms, you have that amount of the journey to go. It looks like you survive for an extra 6 years, but actually, all you've done is get your cancer picked up 6 years earlier. Does that make sense to people? Okay, because this is one of the problems of the cancer screening stuff. You pick up a cancer earlier and your statistics on cancer survival look fantastic, but have you actually achieved anything in overall survival? So if your cancer appears through symptoms, then 0.68 of them will survive for 5 years. And this is the difference, therefore. The relative difference is 31%, 0.0068 to 0.0099. And the absolute difference is that, which is the difference of 0.0099 to 0.0668, which is 0.031%. So that's where the figures do their thing. So when someone says cancer screening protects you against dying by X, what were the absolute figures? The absolute figures are very, very small. So the differences are very small differences in very small numbers. And you get to the point where I lost track and obviously got it wrong, which is not unusual for me, I must say. Cervical cancer, I had a look at this. There was another study come up showing, Swedish study found a 92% cure rate after smear diagnosis. So if you had a smear and cancer was picked up, 92% survival versus 66%. So women appeared with, say, intermenstrual bleeding. There was a 66% cure rate for a symptoms-based diagnosis. And remember, cure means living for 5 years. It doesn't actually mean you're cured. So what were the absolute differences? Well, I had to look this up because these figures weren't provided, and this was in Sweden, and there were 2.5 million women eligible for screening in that population. The total number of deaths from cervical cancer in total was 176. The difference between regularly screened and not screened or irregularly screened was 35. And people who are irregularly screened or not screened tend to be women who live more chaotic, unhealthy lives. So they were not matched populations, so this difference may be a complete artifact. But even if you believe that's a real difference, this means there's a 1 in 70,000 chance that screening was benefit. So you'd have to do 70,000 smears to get a potential and not definite benefit. And yet this was presented as an absolutely wonderful study of wonderfulness. And I thought, you know, I'm not sure, if you look at the costs of that, I mean, if you did a strict analysis, doing a smear, following it up, et cetera, probably costs you about $500 a time. So we're talking millions of dollars for something that may not even exist. Yes, William. And you should be as shocked to see us. So the figures, I'm hoping to give you some idea of how the figures are manipulated here. Now, I know that 5 minutes after this, you'll think, what was that thing again about absolute? But you try and look it up. Try and look at the data for yourself, because it takes me such a long time. I need some help, because every time I look at these studies, to look at a study like that, cervical cancer screening, took me, I think, 3 weeks effectively, just going through all the data, the women alive between the ages of this at this time, and it just takes forever. So it's a use of confusing statistics, which I like from Alice in Wonderland. Can you do addition? The White Queen asked. What's 1 and 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 1? Says, I don't know, Alice. I lost count. That's where we all are. These people have got armies of statisticians putting this stuff together, and then there's little me sitting in front of my computer thinking, oh no, another study. I just can't stand it. I can't. It's just ridiculous. And the manipulations and statistics can be very well hidden, but they're there. And unfortunately, they're almost always there. Is it downright lying? And here's the big one. Saving lives and other nonsense. Heart protection study, secondary prevention study. Again, it was presented as, well, the reduction in LDLs reduced the risk of death by 13% due to reduction in death from vascular causes. It was 18%. No adverse effects on non-cardiovascular causes. And it was presented again as an absolutely magnificent thing. This is the group from Oxford. In this trial, 10,000 people were on a statin. If now an extra 10 million high-risk people worldwide went on to statin treatment, this would save 50,000 lives a year, which they then went on to say is 1,000 a week. I think I could have worked that out. But if you look at it, it's... but I'm going to show you a graph. And this graph, unfortunately, I couldn't get rid of 102. It wouldn't let me take this to 100. I said 102% of people can't be alive at the start of the year. So on this index, 100% of people are obviously alive at the start of the trial. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a match study. And as the trial went on, there were deaths. But of course, this is 86% of people alive, and the full graph would go 10 feet below the ground here. So you can see that people are gradually dying. There are more people dying in the placebo arm than there are dying in the simvastatin arm. Yes? At the end of 5 years, 90.8% were alive on placebo, 92.6% were alive on the statin, The difference was 1.8% after 5 years, which is 0.3% a year. So that would be 36,000 lives saved a year for starters. So it's not nearly 50,000, is it? But what's 14,000 between you, me, and Sir Rory Collins? But when I look at this graph, now a thing they do in oncology studies is they say is mean increase in median survival. You've heard this, haven't you? That's caused by drawing a horizontal line, say the 94% line there. And you can see that on the placebo arm, 94% are dead after about 3 years. How long does it take for that same number of people to die on the simvastatin? All right? Well, it takes about, that'll be about 6 months, wouldn't it? So I've expanded it out to make it more obvious. It is around about that. So I've drawn you 2 lines here of when basically all the people, more people who are alive were now all dead, all right? Because one thing is not going to happen when you take a statin is you're not going to become immortal. I know they say you are, but you're not. And when they say life saved, you say life saved is a stupid thing to say because you're not saving anybody's life. You may be delaying their death. That's what you're doing. You're not saving anything. You're not preventing anything. You are delaying something. So in oncology, they agree with that. They say the increase in median survival is 9 months, a year, whatever it is. Okay? You never get that in cardiovascular trials, do you? They never tell you this. What they do is they take the line, this line, vertically, and they say at that point, 90.8 versus 91 point whatever it is, those lives have been saved. That's what they tell you. Well, that's clear nonsense, isn't it? Because their lives have not been saved. What matters is how much longer are you going to live for? That's why anyone takes a medication. Okay, doc, how much longer would I get? No one asked that question of statins, which is always interesting me. But if you're on a cancer drug, they'll say, how much longer have I got? Why is there this difference between cancer and cardiovascular disease? It's weird in a way, isn't it? This drug may give you 6 months extra life. Oh, that's not much good, is it? I said, well, compared to a statin, it's bloody brilliant. Because if we draw another line, that's the average increase in survival, all right? That's the thing they would do in cancer studies, isn't it? So what you then do is you say, okay, so what does it come to? So at 1.8% of those on the statin would live for around 4 months longer on average. That's the difference in those two lines. But the 4 months is only for 1.8% of the population. So the average increase is 4 months times 0.018, so which is 120 days times 0.018. So that's 2.17 days. So that is how much longer you live, okay? And that's what you should be interested in if you're taking a drug, isn't it? In fact, I was going to publish this, but somebody beat me to it and did it in the, we're just saying you cannot save lives. You can only delay death or extend life. You don't know if you'll be 1.8%. The BMJ Open did this study and said they looked at the studies in primary prevention and secondary prevention with a long enough follow-up. Death was postponed between -5, in other words, those people died 5 days earlier, and 19 days in primary prevention, and between -10 and 27 days in secondary prevention trials. The median postponement of death for primary and secondary prevention trials was 3.2 and 4.1 days. This is after 5 years of treatment. So basically you get slightly less than a day for a year of statin treatment. Best possible scenario. That's the best scenario. So when people say to me, oh my God, your patients are all going to die. Well, maybe they'll die on Tuesday instead of Wednesday, 2029. But maybe all that time they spent going and picking up the statins and worrying about the cholesterol and getting adverse effects from these drugs, maybe they think it's worth not taking these bloody things. These horrible poisons, which do this. This is it, all right? 60% of people taking a statin, 60% increase in type 2 diabetes. 15-fold increase in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Did you know that? Wrote a blog about this. That paper came out recently. 300% increase in the risk of Parkinson's disease. These drugs are poisons. Of course they're poisons. Every drug, everybody says every drug is poison. Yes, they are. Some drugs are more poisonous than others, all right? These ones are particularly unpleasant. And yet, Whenever you say statins cause adverse effects, the entire community on the other side goes off on one and then writes a 300-page review of the fact there's no adverse effects from statins. There is a group called the Cholesterol Treatment Trialist Collaboration. They're in Oxford. They gathered all the data from all the statin trials together, saying to the pharmaceutical companies, we'll keep it all and we won't reveal any because it's confidential. When they're asked to reveal the data on drug-related adverse events, by many people have asked this, do you know what their answer was? It's secret. You can't see it. Data on serious adverse events, you can't see it. It's ours. No one else can see it. The Cochrane Collaboration had a go. They weren't allowed to see it. No one can see it. So they've got all the data and they go, well, they don't cause adverse effects. And then when they were really pushed, and I pushed them with a few other people, they then said, well, actually, we don't have this data. Well, you've just written a paper saying they don't cause any adverse effects. It's all a nocebo effect. Nocebo being, I believe the thing's going to cause me harm, therefore a thing will cause me harm. It's the opposite of the placebo effect. So we have a group who've gained £300 million, which is it used to be $500 million in funding from the pharmaceutical industry, primarily on cholesterol lowering, who hold all the data, who continuously tell everyone how wonderful these drugs are, and they won't let anyone else see the data. Go figure. So you think maybe I feel a bit annoyed about this? You'd be right. It's absolutely extraordinary and just beyond belief, frankly. So I'll just finish with the same statements again. It's just not possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published. Merci, Anne. The case against science is straightforward. Half of it is simply untrue. And Richard Smith. The poor quality of medical research is widely acknowledged, and we're all having to deal with this. We have to deal with this. How can we deal with this? What can we do? Gather our pitchforks and go around the castle and demand that they come out. Where's the ogre? What was it, Shrek 2? You know? They're not listening. What will make them listen? What can make them listen? I don't know. What will happen is the public are suddenly aware. Somehow we can create enough awareness of this utterly desolate world that we live in now. I hate to use the word desolate. I don't believe any medical research I read anymore, not directly. I just don't. I can't. And I look at a lot of medical research, as you may imagine. And then I have this problem is, well, I believe this is a good piece of research, and how can I prove that for sure? How do I know I don't? I'm at a kind of loss, really. But the doctoring of data is part of the game. Maybe you've seen some of this. You'll think, I didn't know any of this. And Jason talked about other things, and we've talked and discussed things. It's just, what is the word? Terrible, awful, dreadful. I didn't go into medicine for this. I didn't go into medicine so that people could tell me to prescribe drugs that bugger people up and don't do any real good. That's not why I did this. I didn't go into medicine so people could say, oh, tell all your people to eat high carbohydrate diets and then they can all diabetes and go on insulin and die. You know. And yet if you stand up and try and say these things, Wikipedia does this to you. It says you're a kook, you're a quack, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all these people are right. Maybe that's the case. Maybe I'm just a deluded fool. Maybe we're all deluded fools sitting in these rooms and wondering what the hell is going on. But I don't think so. Because when I speak to these other people, I can see the shift in their eyes and they know that they're telling lies. Eh? So there we are. You're all stunned.
Any questions of your doctor? Tell me more about the Parkinson's aspect.
Go and look it up. It's in there. Go to Google. Statins, the lipid-soluble statins seem to be worse. They're definitely worse for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis because those that cross the blood-brain barrier, you would think would be worse for damaging the brain. And that seems to be the case from some of the studies. Remember, 25% of the dry weight of your brain is cholesterol. Synapses are made from cholesterol. Myelin sheaths contain vast amounts of cholesterol. Our brains can't work without cholesterol. We have special cells in the brain called glial cells, oligodendrocytes, that make cholesterol and transfer it to support and nurture the brain. Children who are born with low cholesterol synthesis in a disease called Smith-Lemmy-Opitz syndrome are born with severe neurological deficit, microcephaly, poorly developed neurological systems, and die very young. Cholesterol is absolutely essential for our neurological system, and yet we're told if you take statins that they reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's. It's like, what? This is another manipulation they do. They say, oh, look, people who take statins are less likely to get Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's and everything. Yeah, that's because all the studies, the people taking the statins were the ones with the higher cholesterol levels, who were less likely to get these things anyway. So there's an enormous and huge bias put into these things right from the start, and this is another game that they play. Is high cholesterol levels, well, we did a paper, high cholesterol levels over the age of 50, the higher your cholesterol level is, the longer you will live. And that's true also for LDL, and it's also true for cardiovascular disease. I mean, you can find these data, you can put it in a paper, you can publish it. No one can say you're wrong because the data are the data, and yet everyone still says, oh, my cholesterol's too high. I go, no, your cholesterol's not high enough. Get it higher. So, and the answer to that, you can look it up yourself. I think it's better if people do, and then you can say, well, that person was telling the truth, if you like. I mean, there's always a corollary to this. You'll get a paper saying statins reduce the incidence of Parkinson's disease or the prevalence of Parkinson's. But you've got to bear in mind, that would be a study where they would have just looked at people on statins and just said, oh, look, there's less of them who've got Parkinson's disease than people not on statins. But that's the huge confounding bias is built into that study right from the start.
Yeah, I just need to say this. I am a coach. I'm not a doctor. And I have found myself personally conflicted with the messages of both the fitness industry and the medical community personally for a very long time. So I've taken the role of taking care of myself and trusting the research that I do, regardless of who provides me the information, before I make a decision about what I'm going to do for my body or my fitness or my health or my family. And as I listen to all of the speakers today, I continue to ask myself the question of when will it finally stop? And I don't have the answer, and I find myself almost visualizing the pre-2008 financial crisis. I come from the banking industry as a profession for many years. I'm retired from that industry now. But there were statisticians and there were people on the ground that were questioning what was going on. And it wasn't until it crashed that federal regulations came in. There was no more, collusion with, taking people out and spending money and, and it finally began to change. And I think anyone who's applied for a mortgage or been involved in any sort of financial instrument since that time sees that the process is different. I don't think it's 100%, but I guess my larger question is, like, when will the volume be high enough for it actually to stop? Because we all know what's going on, and I mean, I guess that's a rhetorical question because I'm sickened by it. And I just want the volume to increase.
Well, I think that's, we have meetings like this, people go away. The world changes one conversation at a time, as I was told, and people come and have conversations and more conversations. I mean, I think the truth, as I've always said, the truth is, the good thing about the truth is that it can't be killed. It's immortal, it's there, it's to be found. So you just have to keep stating it. And must it change? I don't know. I suppose throughout history there have been people who've lived through periods where nothing has changed. Maybe we just have to say, maybe it won't change in my lifetime. Maybe it won't change in my children's lifetime. Just have to accept that sometimes things just, the forces of Mordor, they're there. The all-seeing eye and all this, and we're just little hobbits. Maybe we will drop the ring into the Mount Doom or whatever, but hopefully we will. But all I say is, my philosophy is, if not you, who? If not now, when? When people say, why do you keep going? I say, well, I suppose I have to, because at the end, And people say, you didn't change anything. I said, well, at least I bloody tried. Give me that. I did try. You know, I didn't give up. And therefore, I suppose I can't, maybe I should have done better. Maybe I should have done more. Maybe I should have found leverage to power. I will be trying to find leverage to power more in the future. Maybe we should all do this and try and find that lever that finally flips the switch. Because at the moment, it is a difficult thing to know when it might happen.